Welcome to Shiny Skin Portrait Retouch in Photoshop. I'm Lee Veris, your host for this step-by-step tutorial. We're going to examine a common problem in portraiture where the subject has somewhat oily skin and we want to tone down shiny highlights. This tutorial will examine the spot healing tool, a hue saturation color adjustment for uneven skin tone, but the primary technique we'll explore is frequency separation. We'll do some recoloring and some dodging and burning to even out skin texture and resculpt the face. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I have this portrait here by Douglas P. Zach, who's very graciously allowed me to use it in this demonstration. And we have, God, we just have this great shot of this great face, and Douglas wanted to knock back the shine on, the oily skin. And how do you do that? So I'm going to go through a complete retouch on this, and usually my first strategy is to just go in and do some spotting. So for that, we have to kind of zoom into 100% here. And I mean, this guy has such a great face. I'm not going to bother to take out all the character in the face, but there are a few little things, like this little kind of blemish on the nose that I think I can just spot out with the spot healing tool. So I'll make my empty layer for spotting. And let's see, let's get the spot healing tool right here. Here's the spot healing brush. Okay. And really the strategy here is just to cover up the area that you want to remove using content aware up here, and see what that looks like first. Okay, so not bad. Sometimes you have to kind of, do it a couple times to get a good texture to replace what was there before. And we might go around and just, little things that we think we can take care of. I'm not going to deal with these veins right now because I have a couple other techniques for that. But we might, take out some of the extra, hairs here, or anything that little hair wisps and things that we might want to remove. We can always take those out. In this kind of a portrait, it's really not necessary to get too crazy about this sort of thing. But I just want to give it a kind of quick once over. And then you also have to kind of zoom out when you're doing this and see if there's anything that presents itself from the zoomed out view. You can sometimes get lost, in the forest for the trees sort of thing. Here's a little thing that caught my eye before, so just kind of knock that back. And this little kind of spot here, I can probably mitigate that. Let's see, now that's kind of a big area, so sometimes the spot healing tool isn't as good for that sort of thing, but let's find out. Okay, not too bad. I think I'll accept that. And that's all the spotting I'm going to do. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to take care of, because it affects how I judge the texture and the color and everything. He's a little red here. I mean, he probably has sort of a red complexion, but for a normal good skin tone, I'm looking over at the CMYK numbers up there in the upper right corner in the info panel. And normally we'd want to see yellow be a bit higher than magenta in a skin tone, and here we have the opposite. And there's probably, a few areas in the face where that color is better. So here the yellow is almost equal to magenta, but overall it's still way too red. So now he's got fairly good neutrality in the gray hair here. It's a little on the warm side, but that's sort of to be expected. And it doesn't look like there's like a serious color cast. He's wearing a black shirt and it's almost neutral there, 59, 59, 61. So I don't think there's a overall color issue. It's just that, we'd like to make his skin look a little less red. So that suggests that we use hue saturation. So I'm going to use a hue saturation here, and we'll target reds. And once I get into a specific color range to target, once I get off of master, I see these little eyedroppers. So I'm going to select the leftmost eyedropper and try to find the reddest color here. We're almost 20 units higher in the magenta than the yellow. So this is a pretty red color right here on the tip of his nose. So we'll just click on that. You see the little color range selector down here just shifted over just a little bit. Now that's the reddest color. I'm going to try and subtract the least red color, which I think is kind of in here, or maybe over here. Here's one that's there where the yellow is equal to the magenta. You can see in the numbers up there in the upper right. So I'm going to subtract that from the range, and you notice how this little dark area trimmed in got smaller. So this is the fully targeted color where we're going to shift it 100%, and then it ramps off into the surrounding colors. So just to visualize what I'm going to shift, I'm going to move this all the way over, do kind of a ridiculous hue shift. And the cyan colors are the ones that are fully targeted. And it's starting to ramp off. I can isolate it even more by trimming this little gray area in, taking the little handle and kind of trimming it in just a little bit. Okay. And now we really need to shift most of the skin anyway, so I'm not going to really try to isolate this any further. We're going to bring this back to 0 and then start scooching it over to the right while I'm measuring and looking at the skin color. And we can looks like we can go pretty far here. Okay, so now I'm kind of in the range where I want to be. I'm going to check both of my areas here. This is a paler color, but it's now at least the yellow is higher than magenta, and the yellow is higher than the magenta here on the nose and on the cheeks, everywhere. Okay, so sometimes you can go too far with this, but we'll stop right here, and then we can adjust. Maybe bring back a little more color variation by reducing the opacity of that. But I still want to keep that. I'd rather keep that nose a little less red. So sort of in this range where yellow is just a little bit higher than magenta, and we'll accept that. Okay, so that's taking care of the color. Now I want to deal with this glossy sort of shine on his face, and the best approach for this, because we do still have a sense of texture in here, the best approach for this particular problem is to do some frequency separation retouching. And so this is the technique for that. I'm going to create a merged copy of all three of these layers at the top. And I can do that. I don't need this info panel anymore, so I'm going to shrink that down. And the shortcut for doing the merged copy is to hold down the Option or Alt key and select Merge Visible. And I'll tell you there's a keyboard shortcut for this, but it involves more than 2 keys. And I sort of keyboard challenged, so I find it easier just to select, hold down 1 key on the keyboard and select that menu option there. So now I have a copy. And then we're going to duplicate this layer so that I have 2 copies of the merged effect of all these 3 layers. So these 2 are identical. This one at the top is going to be our texture. This one right here will be our smooth layer. Okay. And the goal right now is to run a filter to smooth out the skin here. I'm going to go ahead and protect myself here. I'll make that layer into a smart object so I can change my mind about the blur after I've run it. So I'm going to convert to smart object, and now I can run a filter. So we'll just use Gaussian blur here. And my goal is to completely eliminate the texture. So I've got just a sense of it here. I have to look at the zoomed out view as well as the zoomed in view. I'm eliminating the micro texture here, but I think I want to get just about everything, the full texture of the skin into the texture layer. And so I need to eliminate the full texture here. So I'm blurring with a fairly high radius here to make sure that that's eliminated the texture completely. Okay, so now that I've run that, and I can revise this filter later after I've got this effect in place, I'm going to turn on my top layer and target it. And then I'm going to use Apply Image. So go Image, Apply Image, and then we get the Apply Image dialog. And what we're doing, we're not going to use the merge layer, we're going to use the smooth layer since we've targeted the texture layer, and we're going to subtract the smoothness from the sharpness, and that will give us, will eliminate the color mostly here. These numbers are important. The scale is 2 and the offset's 128. This is important so that we get a base of middle gray, and that will allow us to change the apply mode for this layer, which will restore the focus. Okay, so the subtract, scale of 2, offset 128, very important for this technique. And so now we change the apply mode from normal to linear light. And you see now the focus returns and it's identical to the original image, at least the focus of the original image. And we've got now texture and color in kind of two different layers. Okay, so the basic approach here now to get rid of this shine, we're going to put another layer right here underneath the texture layer and above the skin smoothing layer. And I'm just going to get a brush and sample a skin color that's not in the highlight. So just right next to it, I'm going to reduce the opacity here. If I just hit the number key, I can say 20%. And I'm just going to paint into this layer this color, and it sort of knocks back the sheen. Here, well, let's turn that on and off. See, so I'm replacing the white color that's underneath with skin color. And down here, we'll do the same thing here. I want to sample a color that's next to that region and gradually kind of paint it in. So you can see how that's really sort of knocking back that highlight. It's essentially replacing it with the skin color, but I don't want to completely eliminate that highlight. I still need to keep some shape there, so that's why I'm painting it at a low opacity. And we can kind of work the shading of these a little bit, kind of work the darker parts in sort of from the outside in and leave a little bit of shape in that highlight. So frequency separation makes this job pretty easy. So I'm just kind of trying to get some natural skin color in there. And you can kind of see, and that may be enough. I mean, we can probably knock this back a little further, but the goal is not to completely eliminate the natural highlight there, just to sort of knock back the shine so it doesn't look so white. Okay. All right, now we can also use this technique. Like when I zoom out, I look at this and there's a little shadow right here under the nose. It kind of, where his mustache is, kind of bugs me. My eye is jumping to that. So I want to sort of mitigate that as well. So I'm going to come in here and I'll just sample a color, a skin color, and I know this is lighter than that shadow, that color that I sampled. I'm going to reduce my opacity a little bit and just sort of paint this in there. And since the focus and the texture is coming from this the texture layer above it, I can paint right in there. And essentially I'm lightening up that shadow. So now it doesn't bother me as much. It's kind of, sort of mitigated. And also this sort of dark shadow under here is kind of bugging me. So again, this technique makes it pretty easy. We're going to sample an appropriate skin color, and I'll just start painting that in. So my goal here is to lighten this shadow a bit. And can sample from surrounding area. And I'm just kind of softening the edge because I'm getting this color to gradually match the area next to it. Start trying to even out the texture a little bit here. So again, painting with very low opacity until I'm sort of softening that shadow. And it's kind of almost like dodging and burning. But I'm using the color of the skin. And now let's turn off the texture and look at what's going on. Okay, so you can see what's happening is I'm gradually replacing this dark shadow color with a lighter color around it until it just sort of softens that shadow enough that we're not as drawn, we don't see it as so strongly. See, if I turn that off, you see how much stronger that is, and your eye kind of jumps right to it. So right now I'm taking the contrast away from that so that your eye isn't drawn over to that area. And now the last little step in here is to maybe we can actually knock back a little bit of the texture in the texture layer. And a strategy here would be to make a group a layer with that texture. So I'm going to make an empty layer and I'll put it in a group by option clicking here. And this is this will be a retouching for that texture. And here's our recolor layer. Okay, so now we'll work on the texture just a little bit. And if I turn this into, we'll use soft light, I can do kind of dodging and burning in it. So I'm going to paint in it with white or black to dodge or burn. And I want to have my my opacity way down. So we want it at 5% or less. So let's see. I'll start with a little bit of white, and I'm not trying to eliminate anything. I'm just going to kind of lighten a blemish just a little bit, and just so you can see, I'm just sort of knocking that back because I'm painting in with white, and in a soft light layer, that's going to lighten the texture that's already there. Okay, so I can kind of get in there and just, pore by pore, sort of just knock back some of this texture. Just lighten it up just ever so slightly, just the ones that kind of catch my eye. So he's got kind of a little divot in here. We'll just kind of dodge it back just a little bit. And it's much better to do this a little bit at a time. And it's also considerably easier to do this with a Wacom tablet, of course. There's my little plug for Wacom, but I will let you in on a little secret. I'm actually using a mouse right now. So it is possible to do this. And again, my goal is not to cover that up completely. It's also really good for these kinds of sort of things. So the little veins, we can knock those back. Just make the brush really small and kind of get in there. And gradually, knock those little veins down. And this way you can kind of avoid over smoothing. If you do too much work with the spot healing tool, um, you can get overlapping textures that tend to kind of smooth it out. So you don't, if especially with this really textured skin, the less of that type of retouching you do, the better. And this really kind of avoids that whole issue. So we just get in there and we lighten things that are too dark without trying to take them away completely, and see how effective that is at kind of making that stuff disappear. And I could go around also and kind of work the folds under his skin a little bit like that. And, trying to decide if I should lighten the eyes a little bit. We might be able to do a little bit of that in the same layer, the same soft light layer. So if I brush with white, again, I'm going to be lightening the texture, but that's also going to be affecting the underlying image. Let's bring up my intensity just a little bit here. Make a, we're just going to ping those highlights just a little bit. So I'm painting with white, and that is lightening what's already there. Okay, and we can very subtly also sort of lighten the brown color of the eye just a little bit. And I usually go kind of opposite where the catch light is, just to give it a little bit more brightness in there. You can also work the white of the eye a little bit if you want. It's probably not that necessary for this particular portrait, but maybe just that little bit of eye pinging kind of puts a little more sparkle in the eye. Okay, so let's sort of check out, see where we've come so far. So here's the original. Okay, and notice how the thing that I really noticed are these dark areas, which I've softened out without destroying the texture of the skin. And our highlight also is improved. One last thing I'd like to do is maybe add a little bit of vignetting, just to kind of finish it off. It's a nice, for this type of formal, a studio type portrait, I think it's a nice effect. So I'll make an empty layer at the top, and I'm going to paint into this layer with a gradient at low opacity, and my gradient style is the second one, which is foreground to transparent. So get the title in, foreground to transparent. That's important. So we're going to paint in with a gradient, and it will build it up gradually, and that's why we're using low opacity. So the trick is just to pull it in from the sides. It's like doing edge burning. And you can kind of change the angle a little bit every time you do this, kind of build it up. And even if you kind of do it too much, you can bring it back because it's in a layer. So notice how I'm just sort of gradually bringing this up, and I'm completely unconcerned about covering up going over the face, right? Because it's in a layer, and I can just reduce the opacity of that later. So usually my strategy is to go a little bit too far and then just come back with the opacity. So something like that's probably good. And then just to make sure that I'm not covering up, I mean, in this case, I think it's probably helping the top of the head getting a little darker there. But I could put a layer mask in there and brush back over the face, where just to make sure that I wasn't covering up the face with this vignette tone, right? Okay, so there we are, and here's where we started. I think we made a big improvement here, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at some advanced techniques for portrait retouching. You can find much more information on my website and my blog. I have a YouTube channel with lots of video tutorials, and you can follow me on Twitter to find out about my various classes and workshops. Thanks for watching.